So a common question I'm receiving is about the topic of BDSM, which is bonding, dominance, submission, and discipline. And so what is happening is sometimes when people are getting to know each other for marriage, one person states, I'm really into BDSM. This is my sexual preference. This is what I want. Are you okay with this? And there's a lot of, partners saying, it's scary to hear this because BDSM has a lot of connotation that comes with it. There's potential power play involved. There might be some acts which are not typical within intimacy. So I'm very curious to hear what your perspectives are in terms of what you've heard about this topic. And there's definitely more context I can add after that.
Yeah, this is a big one.
Yeah.
There are a couple of angles to it. So just one, let me just what pops into my mind is the Sharia aspect. So let's do that first, and then we can maybe talk about some of the other components to it. But the only sexual act that is not permissible between couples is anal sex. Any other type of act with the consent, and that's the key thing, with the consent of both the husband and the wife is permissible. So as from one point of view, now again, the problem when you say something like BDSM, the mind goes wild with all of these type of ideas and images and that unfortunately we're inundated with. And if you went to something like the Wikipedia page for BDSM, I'm sure there's going to be a whole host of different type of manifestations. I'm not saying that all of those manifestations are permissible, because we also have a general rule not to cause harm or to reciprocate harm. La darar wa la dirar. So if anything, if any act causes harm overtly, including striking somebody's face, which we're also prohibited from doing unless, once in self-defense or in battle, but that's not what we're talking about. Those are the type of things are impermissible. So when we talk about BDSM from the Sharia point of view, again, we need a nuanced understanding of what exactly what acts we're talking about. And this is obviously not the forum to do that. And, unfortunately, it will become very graphic. But there is much more room, I think, in the Sharia than one might first assume. That's one aspect. The other aspect is, wanting to explore these type of things is directly a result of the dominant culture around us, and most likely some type of influence of pornography. So that is a problem, I think, is fair to say. Not that one wants to try different things with one spouse in a conversation in a respectable way with their spouse. That's one thing. But that we're influenced from the outside with something that's really not from our, paradigm, and then wanting to introduce it and in a way coerce our partner, that itself, that sort of trajectory right there, that's problematic. So when I hear that, if somebody came to me with that, I wouldn't really be so keen on giving the Sharia answer as much as I would be keen in understanding where is this coming from. So that's where I want to come back to you, because to be honest, I have not dealt with this firsthand. I just dealt with it theoretically. So where are you seeing this play out in relationships, and how does it play out? What do you advise?
The second point you share is the context I also focus on, because unfortunately, let's say a Muslim man will say to a potential wife, well, this is my sexual preference. This is just the way I am. So I'm looking for somebody who's compatible with me with wanting to try out BDSM. And then when I speak to Muslims, I'm like, hold on a second. We're not born with sexual preferences. They are imprinted on us based on what we are exposed to, as you said. And a lot of times these preferences come from pornography society peers of what is kind of out there in the dominant culture. So I'm often working with Muslims to dig a little deeper about, wait a second, you've been influenced. This is not the way to approach sexual intimacy in marriage. There needs to be sexual, what's called curiosity, in that you will learn about your spouse's needs and pleasure in marriage, but to approach even before marriage and say, this is what my needs are. First of all, how do you know that? Has there been sexual experimentation? Have you had other partners? That's a whole nother issue that needs to be explored. But then approaching marriage in terms of, we will learn about one another's needs and preferences in marriage, but to approach marriage with that already kind of set, as you said, is quite problematic. So it's something that I would need to talk to that person about more, because it's not something that is inherent to us. It's something that we've been influenced to believe.
So related to that is something, you know, else, which is, well, what if the person doesn't want? What if your partner doesn't want? Forget about the background. We've talked about that, but let's
Yeah.
just assume that one person, person A, wants to try something in this regard with person B, and then person B doesn't want. Is that rejection problematic? Well, no, because that's not the default understanding of the sexual act. Just to be very
Mm,
blunt about it, the default understanding of the sexual act as defined by the Sharia is penetration.
yeah.
And that's it. It's very simple. Now, all that other stuff is not. That's the other. That's something else. We could consider it foreplay. We consider it, you know, something else, some type of other physical engagement. So a woman rejecting that, for example, or a man rejecting that towards other person is not a rejection of sexual rights that are we're familiar with discussing in Islam, but rather
Mm,
rejecting something that just doesn't feel right. And that's problematic. If people force this on their partner, that's highly, highly problematic. And you know, again, when somebody says, I'm hearing you say that people are saying this is my preference. I mean, I find that statement very problematic as well,
mhm,
because, you know, when I'm looking for a spouse, I'm not, I don't think that high on my list are, you know, sexual preferences and positions, but I mean, I'm thinking about starting a family and, you know, the greater principles of life, the journey of life, all of that. So when somebody leads with something like that, or almost leads with something like that, I think that's also a sign that we have removed the sexual act from what it was meant, how Allah Ta'ala created us with that desire, and we have moved it to a type of prominence that really isn't natural, from the point of view is that it's not something that we need to engage with every minute of the day in this elaborate way. So I think, again, this dance that we have with, you know, our
mm.
ethical values and the dominant culture, it's something that we're going to have to grapple with, because we can't escape the dominant culture. You know, we're all part of it. We're all consumed by it.
I really appreciate you bringing up that nuance, because it seems as though one's self-gratification and one's sexual needs has been led away to be what it is from a traditional standpoint. It's kind of become very me, this is what I want, this is what I need, but that's not doesn't sound like that's the spirit of Islam in terms of our values and our ethics. There's always this greater purpose. So anytime somebody is very like self-focused, self-gratification focused, and too much emphasis on what they want and need, I think that's often a red flag that I would want to dig a little deeper with them on.
Well, it's also a sense of entitlement.
Yeah.
In another conversation, we talked about people that approach marriage with a checklist. Well, this is one of those manifestations, that I'm entitled to certain things. But why don't we think about marriage, about how can I sacrifice for the satisfaction and gratification of the other? How can I empower my partner and my spouse to be the best version of themselves? That's certainly a different perspective, and that's the perspective that our tradition brings to the table. Of that, you know, God says He created from each one of us, both men and women, our partner, our soul
Mm,
partner, so that our job in earth, one of our jobs, is to find that person and match ourselves with that, and then we become like one. And you know, there's a huge literature about this love and romance and the matching of souls in Islam, I mean. And when you see marriage that way, it will totally redefine a lot of these type of things. So we should start to think about, what am I willing to give to my partner,
mm.
not what am I entitled to.
Very, very wise words that I hope more Muslims will heed, inshallah.
Inshallah.